Christmas. For years, it has been dominated by an immortal fat man who's responsible for breaking and entering literally billions of times every year. This alone is enough to have him put into prison for life. Yes, my peasants, I'm talking about Santa Claus. Look, the man weighs at least a deuce and a half, but does that stop him from stealing other people's hard-earned milk and cookies? No! Now, tradition holds that he flies around on a sled driven by reindeer so he can deliver presents to everybody. How does he do this, you might ask? By infiltrating the dwellings of the human species via the chimney. And he manages this all in one night. At least that's what they want you to believe. Well, I'm not buying it. You're telling me that this fatty can fit down a chimney not just once, but billions of times in one night? I doubt he can even roll off the couch. Nonetheless, Santa Claus has still managed to take Jesus' birthday away by drawing all the focus away from him. As a devout and loving Catholic morally superior, I oftentimes ask myself why Jesus still allows him to live. For his Christmas not in celebration of, I don't know, the birth of God? So I decided to make Jesus happy with me by working to undermine and ultimately destroy Santa Claus. As the intellectual powerhouse and advanced being that I am, I, Louis Guidetti, decided to study up on who exactly the Santa Claus is, so as to better understand my enemy, and with that knowledge, destroy him for the sake of Christians everywhere. So join me as we delve into the topic at hand with aid of yet another masterfully executed painting I used to organize my noble thoughts on Santa Claus. And you can trust my research. There is no need to fact check this. Don't fact check this. Throughout my extensive travels, I have come across many lesser humans, which has given me an uncanny knack for understanding the various cultures that populate this cold rock we like to call Earth. Those cultures in turn supply us with an endless amount of stories, many of which are extremely old. And as in many stories, the main figure started out as something completely different altogether. Such is the story of Santa Claus. And as we all know, tradition dictates that he goes by the name Saint Nick as well. This brings us back to the year 270 AD, when Saint Nicholas was born into a wealthy family in a town named Patara in the Roman Empire. Being that he was born in the Roman Empire, I naturally put together that he fought alongside Maximus Decimus Meridius in Gladiator, and I have come to the conclusion that he looks somewhat akin to this. Nonetheless, I could not find any evidence of such, thereby confirming my suspicions that people are dumb, and I'm once again ahead of the curve by several hundred years. That being the case, I continued my research on my nemesis, and what I found was fascinating. It turns out that when his parents died, he sold all his wealth and gave it to the poor. Not the move I would have made, but okay. There was one man in particular who was said to have been a very devout person of faith, and he had lost all of his wealth, thereby putting him in a desperate situation of not being able to provide dowries for his 3 daughters. Now, for some reason, this meant that they couldn't be married and would instead have to become prostitutes, according to Wikipedia, my extensive research. St. Nicholas would have none of that, and in the dark of night, he decided to launch a bag of gold through the window of this poor man's house, which promptly knocked him out and killed him. Kidding. With the gold, he was able to marry his first daughter off. The same thing happened with the second daughter, and finally with the third, the man had a brilliant idea to stay awake to see who was giving him the moolah. And upon catching St. Nicholas in the final act, he thanked him for his generosity, while St. Nicholas, with great humility, asked him not to speak about the incident, which is why we don't know about it today. Now, this story is our first clue on how to catch Santa Claus, and that is to stay awake on Christmas Eve to try to catch him. Simple in its planning and execution, but so much so that how could he even see it coming? Because it's the last thing that he would expect. You see, my dear peons, researching the enemy does pay off, so let's continue our story for further clues in the interest of defeating Santa. Sometime later, upon returning from a trip to the Holy Land, the local bishop of Myra died. It was decided by the priests in that city that the first priest that entered the church that morning would be made the bishop. It goes without saying that St. Nicholas was that priest, and he became the new bishop. He would have to suffer many persecutions, including imprisonment by the evil Emperor Diocletian, but he took it like a man. Many miracles are tied to St. Nicholas, including a once popular story that few now know about. There was an evil butcher who killed 3 children with the intention of curing them to sell them as ham during a famine. perfectly innocent plan, really. He pickled them in a barrel, but St. Nicholas thwarted the evil butcher by seeing past his deception and promptly resurrected the pickled children by making the sign of the cross. Though its authenticity is debated, it was a very popular story before it was slowly forgotten because of its obscure depiction, which is that of St. Nicholas standing with the 3 naked children with a wooden barrel at his feet. Over the years, people forgot about the story and assumed he was the patron saint of children and brewers because they obviously go hand in hand. St. Nicholas is known for many other miracles as well. One of them happened during another famine in Myra between the years 311 AD and 312 AD. A ship was in port and loaded with wheat for the emperor in Constantinople. St. Nicholas, wishing to give reprieve to the hungry, convinced the sailors to give him some of the wheat and in turn promised them that they would not go with loss. They consented, and upon the delivery of the wheat to the emperor, they were surprised to find that the wheat weighed the exact amount as the original did, even though St. Nicholas took 2 years' worth of it from the stash. He effectively multiplied the food, just as Jesus had. Another miracle occurred when he was visiting the Holy Land. A storm almost destroyed the ship he and his crew were traveling on, so he rebuked the waves, and in turn the storm calmed, just as Jesus did. This made him known as the patron saint of travelers and sailors. His feast day is celebrated on December 6th, and during the Middle Ages, the night before the 6th, it was a long-held tradition to give presents to the children in honor of the saint and his generosity. This custom was eventually moved in England to Christmas Eve in an effort to quell the veneration of saints. What is the veneration of saints, you might ask? It's simply this: honoring the godly attributes the saint exhibited in life in order to learn from and emulate them. Some believe this to be a form of worshiping the person, but this is a misconception as it gives credit to a higher source. My research indicates that sometime during his life, St. Nicholas put on a couple 100 pounds and achieved immortality. Managing to live so long, he eventually encroached upon the Feast of Yule, celebrated during the midwinter months by the Germanic people, which included the English. During this time, it is said that the god Odin led a ghostly procession through the sky, which came to be known as the Wild Hunt. It was alleged that during this time, supernatural occurrences increased dramatically. Odin was pictured as an old man with a long white beard and a cloak riding on an 8-footed steed known as a Sleipnir, who'd also bring his people gifts. Coincidence? I think not. I continued my research and I found that around the 16th century in England, he was being referred to as Father Christmas and represented the spirit of good cheer during Christmas. In 1821, the book A New Year's Present to the Little Ones from 5 to 12 contained an anonymous poem indicating Santa riding on a sleigh bringing presents to children. Another anonymous poem in 1823 named The Night Before Christmas revealed the names of Santa's reindeer and said that he was nothing more than a fat, tiny elf and that his sleigh was tiny as well. This was proof to me that the fat man was a master of deception, and I couldn't trust everything that was on the internet about him, which came as a shock to me because we all know that everything you read on the internet is true. In 1843, Santa Claus obviously paid off Charles Dickens to write about him in his story A Christmas Carol, where he portrayed Santa as the ghost of Christmas present. Here he took Scrooge around London and spread Christmas cheer by showing him the good nature of his fellow man and those he wrongfully, but actually rightfully, looked down upon. On a side note, the Christmas Carol movie done in 2009 had a particularly disturbing rendition of Santa as a gargantuan, fat, laughing giant. I couldn't help but feel like I was about to be eaten by him throughout the duration of the entire scene. I highly recommend watching it. In the 1860s, Santa confided in an illustrator named Thomas Nast that he lived in the North Pole, while in 1889, he told the poet Catherine Lee Bates that he had a wife named Mrs. Claus. Starting in the 1930s, Santa struck up some shady deals with Coca-Cola by letting them use his face to make a profit. It is no secret that Coca-Cola initially contained cocaine, which led me to believe that Santa was at one time a drug lord, maybe even still. Make the connections, people. It is my belief that Santa was at the head of a massive illegal drug organization. But as with many other things, I am ahead of the curve, and this has not yet been officially recognized. Yet. Several other beverages would use his face for advertisement, which is probably how he was able to afford to expand his dominance over Christmas. It was also in the 20th century that it was discovered that all those little toys were made by elves, despite the fact that each one said made in China. This was proof that Santa was in bed with the Chinese, and over time his legend continued to grow. Now this brings us to the present. I must say that something feels wrong after all this research. Are all the things that we've been taught about Santa real, like we've been led to believe? Or is the ever-shifting image of the fat man an indication of humans' imagination gone wild to fill in that which does not exist, namely, is his existence a lie? My friends, this is why you watch this channel, to learn that which you cannot learn on your own because of your small brains. And the Christmas message I would like to gift to you this day is the fruit of my genius-level intellect, which ran on all 400 cylinders to figure this one out. And with this revelation, Jesus will be made happy, Christian duty will be fulfilled, and that is, Santa Claus isn't real. And on that note, I would like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, little boy! Ho, ho, ho.